Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us for April 1st edition of Bench to Market Series Talk. Today, we are very honored to have one of our Oversight Committee members, Adam Jacobs, here joining us. He is going to talk about passion, perseverance, and progress, his personal entrepreneurial journey in tissue therapeutics. So, to start off, for those who don't know, this is hosted by Biolocity. Biolocity is an accelerator program, a philanthropic program funded out of Georgia Tech and Emory. This is part of our education series. We do also offer non-dilutive funding, industry expertise, and intense project management for teams that get accepted into our program. We do highly encourage you to subscribe to our YouTube channel. You can utilize this QR code to find it. We do record these sessions. We have several playlists that will help you along your journey to help drive you towards success. Now let's talk and go ahead and introduce Adam. Adam is the principal and CEO of Biothera3, an advising and consulting, and CEO of Pro Therapeutics. He supports early stage tissue therapeutics companies with strategic guidance, executive coaching, and business and technology development, and leads Pro Therapeutics' efforts to develop and manufacture biological tendons for joint restoration. He previously founded and built Dimension Bio, a Chicago company advancing biomaterials and 3D printing for tissue therapeutics. And he has served as an executive in residence with Army Biofab Startup Lab, Portal Innovations, and Nucleate, and remains active in Termis and Society for Biomaterials. Adam is a lead inventor on more than a dozen patent families and author of numerous high-impact publications. He contributes to international standards and FDA guidance and received the 2024 Termis and Adam, you're going to have to tell me how I was supposed to pronounce that. Innovation and Commercialization.
You got it.
Okay, awesome. Innovation and Commercialization Award. He holds a BS and MS degrees in Material Science and Engineering from Georgia Tech and a master's and PhD degrees from Northwestern University in Biomedical Engineering and Material Science and Engineering. So now I will stop my share and go ahead and turn it over to you, Adam.
Right. Well, thank you very much for that kind introduction. Can you see my screen?
We can.
All right, let's get in. Switch it. All right. Well, thank you very much for the kind introduction again, and for reading all that. I know it's quite a bit to read, but it's a pleasure. I have the pleasure of speaking with you all today about my own entrepreneurial journey in a medical technology space. I specifically call the space that I operate in tissue therapeutics. I think for the benefit of the audience, that broadly includes tissue manufacturing, tissue engineering, regenerative medicine, a lot of technologies at the interface of what is technically defined as medical devices versus biologics and cell therapies. So it covers a broad areas, and tissue therapeutics is generally a good name for that. So before I get into my personal journey, I want to scare you a little bit, right? I'm not going to be talking about this slide today. I'm not going to be talking about product development. I think the educational series that Biolocity offers can cover a lot of these different areas. So the talk I'm going to give you all today is a little more personal and not as much mechanistic or detailed regarding processes and methods for getting your product, your idea to be a product to market, right? We're going to talk about something a little more personal, so don't be too scared. As I get into this, it's going to be all right. So I want to start this off with a question. Just think this to yourself. Why do you do what you do? And this is going to be a recurring theme in this talk. It's going to get towards your motivation, right? Your motivation for why you do what you're doing today, your motivation for what you want to be doing in the near future, your motivation for what you want to be doing in the distant future, and for kind of narrowing it to this talk, your motivation for pursuing an entrepreneurial path, right? And so that motivation could be money, could be fame, could be some broader social impact you want to have, could be having a personal motivation to help a certain population of patients or those who are suffering. All of these are valid motivations for doing what you do, why you do what you do. And you, as an individual, will have some definition of what does success mean to you based on what is your motivation, right? And so for this talk, I imagine most of the folks on this call have or are working with some type of technology, some type of medical technology, right? And again, I'm focused on therapeutics, but it could be a diagnostic, it could be a service, it could be something, right? Something in the medical realm that in some way improves patient outcomes or overall healthcare success, right? That's a motivation for you, right? And if you're on this call, you probably have some interest in being an entrepreneur or you are currently an entrepreneur. And I love showing this slide because if you type in entrepreneur into Google Images, these are some of the first ones that pop up, right? And so every entrepreneur out there is smiling, is happy, looks like they've slept a long time, right? They're just, living the dream, right? But in reality, going down the entrepreneurial route is difficult. It's hard. It's a slog. You have to persevere, and it's risky, right? Entrepreneurs can take various levels of risk. They could be putting everything they have into it. They could be quitting their current full-time job, putting their life savings into something that they're going behind. They could be doing something on the side, right? Either way, you're taking a risk at something that others aren't taking a risk at. So appreciating that risk, appreciating that slog, that reality is incredibly important. And I'm going to be sharing my journey today just to show how I've gone through it. But it's important to understand that those entrepreneurs out there, I'm just going back a few slides, those who are out there speaking to you and often talking about how great their company is or their technology is or whatever they're doing, they may look like this on stage when they're talking to you, but they're actually the person pushing balls up a hill, right? And so they're going through a lot. And so it's okay for you guys to be going through a lot too. There's everyone out there is in the entrepreneurial space is going through something similar. So to start kind of the entrepreneurial side of this, from the academic perspective, and I myself come out of academia, I'll get into my background a little bit more in a bit. But I remember when I was doing a lot of my work in academia, I really thought that I was building the best thing ever. And then if I built my technology up to a certain degree, big companies would come along, big biotech or big med tech, they would just come along and say, yes, that is great. I want to license this technology, and then they'll license it, they'll make a product out of it, and they'll get it to patients, right? So I could continue doing my research, continue developing my technology in a laboratory, and I wouldn't necessarily have to go through all these steps to commercialize, to develop a product and then commercialize it. So while this pathway is possible, of course, it does happen where you develop a technology in an academic lab and it's licensed and it reaches big commercial success. It's possible. It's not that probable. So what is most likely is that you have a technology that, for whatever reason, and it can be valid, it could be invalid, you think is the best technology out there that solves a specific problem. Early up in the laboratory, you are commercially very risky. You're a long way from a product, you're a long way from market. And because of that commercial risk, you also have a very small financial upside. So if you're going down the entrepreneurial route, your big goals are decreasing commercial risk while increasing financial upside. So you need to keep on building things for them being larger companies or larger partners to come. And this is really where the perseverance comes in all along this path, right? There is a lot that needs to be done. There's a lot that can go wrong. There's a lot that can go right. But if you continue with it, even the smallest bit of progress can have huge outcomes in terms of patient success or your own personal view of success. And a big thing I've encountered when I've been working with a lot of entrepreneurs, and I went through this myself, and I'll get into my moment for this, was you have this moment of, I have to do this. Whatever I'm working on, whatever it is, I have to get it out there, right? And I myself still have trouble kind of defining that feeling or that kind of that push. But I myself have had it, and I've encountered many individuals who have just said to me, I have to do this, right? So whatever that motivation is, it pushes and pushes and pushes to the point where you feel you have to take that big risk. You feel you have to push that boulder up a hill. You feel that if no one else takes this technology and runs with it, if no one will do it, then I have to do it. You have to do it, right? And so the title of this talk is Passion, Perseverance, and Progress. And I'm going to weave these themes in for the next few slides. But other than just the alliterative aspect of the title, as I've gone back and looked at my own journey, I've discovered that, I myself I've made decisions, significant decisions in my professional and personal life related to this, that have been driven by a certain passion. Why do I do what I do? And then the majority of the time in between, making a decision and having some kind of result it's been difficult. I've had to persevere, had to push, right? But it's all been worth it when even little bits of progress are made. So there's little victories and there's big victories, but when you see that, you can use your passion to drive through something very difficult, and you get a little bit of progress out of it. You get a little bit of development on your product. You build a nice team. You get your product out in the market. You see it get into patients. You see it help someone. It makes it all worth it. And so you have a path in front of you at this point. Are you going to go down that entrepreneurial road, or are you not? And so this is where I get into my own entrepreneurial journey. This is where I want to make it a bit personal, and I do want to make sure I save a little bit of time at the end of the presentation in case there's time for questions. But I'm going to take you from basically the start, the earliest part of my life up until present day, and how I've gotten into the entrepreneurial side of things and why I continue to stay in it in different capacities. So a bit about me, and I'll get into my background a bit more as we go on. So I do first and foremost consider myself an engineer. As Angie mentioned, I originally got my bachelor's and master's degree from Georgia Tech. So how could I not consider myself an engineer at that point? So my first language is engineering. My heart is in engineering, but I'm also an entrepreneur. I love the early stage side of things. I love the possibilities that are in front. I love the risk. I love not knowing what could come next, right? I am not a large company type of individual. I love taking that risk. I love building teams. I love connecting the dots and creating something from essentially nothing. And that connecting part goes through what I do today in Biothera 3 is I love recognizing different team strengths or different individual strengths or different organizational strengths and just making those connections, because as I'll touch on in this, getting a product to market or building a company, it's not an individual effort. It takes a strong team, both a core team as well as an extended team. So having those connections is incredibly important. And I have found, just on my personal reflection over the past 15 or 20 years or so, I love to mentor. I love to support those individuals who are going through what I went through previously. I love sharing my advice on what I did wrong, what I did right. I love to advise companies, and a bigger thing is what I do now is I love to educate kind of the broader, just say broader economic space, broader outside of the technology space, about the promise of technologies like tissue therapeutics, biofabrication, tissue manufacturing, because at least in my biased opinion, they're very cutting edge technologies that could have huge implications in terms of healthcare outcomes. So I love educating not just those in universities, but those in government, capital providers, venture capitalists, angel networks, et cetera, so that they can make better informed decisions in terms of their investments, but also have a better idea of the risks and possible rewards that can come out of these amazing technologies. So my journey, my professional journey, you could say, technically starts at the Georgia Institute of Technology, or Georgia Tech, and it ends with my current roles at Biothera 3 and Pro Therapeutics. But I'm going to start even way before that, because what shapes your passion and why do you do what you do starts long before you attend university, right? And my early life actually started in hospitals and Ronald McDonald houses. I had an older brother of 2 years who was born with a severe heart defect. And my family, we moved around from state to state, major hospital to major hospital, spending a lot of time in Minneapolis, specifically living in Ronald McDonald houses while my brother was getting care at the particular children's hospitals. And as when you're 2, 3, or 4 years old, you think that's a normal life, right? But looking back, I realized not a lot of people necessarily go through that, but I was surrounded by a lot of people who were, their whole job, their motivation, both personally and professionally, was to provide care, not just care for my brother, the patient, but the entire family, surrounding my brother, including myself. So it's something, of course, I did not appreciate as a 3 or 4-year-old. I just liked the different toys they had at the various Ronald McDonald houses we went to and lived at. So I grew up in those hospitals, again, thinking that was normal. But over the course of that time, interacting with my older brother of 2 years, who ultimately did not survive, despite the best efforts of many great doctors and nurses and other healthcare professionals, got really interested in science. A lot of that interest came from that older brother. How he got involved in it, I couldn't tell you. But I started to love everything science and then everything engineering. I just wanted to do anything and everything. I was curious. My motivation as I was growing up, before I went to university, and then as I entered university, was out of pure curiosity. I want to just learn as much as I can about all the cool things happening in every scientific and technical field possible. And so through that motivation is ultimately how I chose to go to Georgia Tech and then pursue a degree in material science and engineering, where shout out to the department there. They did a very good job at convincing me that, yeah, you can do anything in material science and engineering. You can cover all these exciting fields, and they were not wrong about that. So everything from metals and alloys to electronics to biomedical items to aerospace, you can do it all in material science and engineering. So you don't have to worry about picking exactly what you want to do right away. And so that was perfect for my motivation, was purely curiosity driven, purely learning driven. And through the course of my time at Georgia Tech, 2005 to 2010, I had some of the most amazing mentors and advisors. I got to participate in a lot of research programs. My primary research at Georgia Tech had nothing to do with anything medical. In fact, nothing I did from 2005 to 2010 had anything to do with healthcare or anything medical. What I focused on was metals and alloys, explosive materials, impactors, things that you would assume. If you were to look at me today, how did I start there, right? And I can get into that a little bit, but what was important was at Georgia Tech is that I got my motivation for learning as much as I could was satisfied. And so to me, just being really personally successful and satisfying that curiosity was extremely important. But then towards the end of my degree programs, I stopped and asked myself, and I didn't exactly ask myself in this way. I wasn't as self-conscious or self-aware as I am now, but I did spend time just thinking, okay, I've been involved in all these things, but I guess I have to kind of figure out something specifically I want to focus on, right? And so why do I do what I do? I'm not only curious, but ultimately through that research and through my prior life, I realized I did want to help people, right? And I'm an engineer now. I want to help people. So the most obvious thing I can do is, okay, I want to go create biomaterials and go into the regenerative medicine space, right? I want to use my materials knowledge that I used in all those metals and alloys and ceramics and stuff to create biomaterials that heal, right? And so in 2010, I decided to go to Northwestern University to pursue research in biomaterials, having never taken a biology class, ever really no biomedical training or exposure. I understand that potentially a lot of people on the call today are within the biomedical engineering department at Georgia Tech and associated with Emory. I had no connection with biomedical engineering or with Emory University when I was at Georgia Tech. Had no idea it was really even there. But I decided to go into biomaterials. I decided to come to Chicago at Northwestern University, and I decided I'm going to apply my materials knowledge to biomaterials. And at the time, this is back in 2010, 3D printing was very much a buzz technology, a buzzword, getting a lot of attention. But I was really disappointed that people who were doing 3D printing, whether they're doing it at home or in an academic lab, or what I was seeing in industry, the materials they were using were not, they were not very useful. They were making plastic Yodas or plastic octopi. If you're involved in 3D printing back then, everyone was printing octopuses and Yodas for some reason, right? So I decided in 2010, being the one of the first members of a new laboratory at Northwestern, was I'm going to take my materials knowledge, all that Georgia Tech taught me and all the opportunities I got through Georgia Tech enabled me to do. I'm going to take that and combine it with biology, the body, right? And it was in retrospect kind of a very naive approach, but also in retrospect, I'm very glad it was a naive approach, because had I understood back then the complexities of biology and the difficulties of the complexities of tissues and organs and all that, probably would not have decided to do this, right? But at the time, I would say my naivety was my strength and my curiosity. was my strength to combine 3D printing with biology. And skipping over a lot of work that was done, but ultimately, what resulted from my work at Northwestern, heavily inspired and motivated by my time at Georgia Tech, was what I would consider a platform of platform technologies. Essentially, a way to rapidly 3D print nearly any material you can think of, metals and alloys, biologics, whether they be natural or synthetic, electronics, ceramics, etc., that very quickly and at room temperature, just a very, very scalable system. And that was imparted to me through my time at Georgia Tech. Whatever you do, you need to make sure that you can actually do it a lot, do it consistently and reliably, right? So I developed this extensive platform, including many distinct biomaterials for regenerating tissues. Hyperelastic bone for regenerating hard tissues, so both dental tissues as well as bone. 3D graphene for repairing and regenerating neuromuscular tissues. Tissue papers, which is essentially extracellular matrix-based products. Focus on a lot of different soft tissues, but made a lot of progress in really restoring fertility in ovaries, and also used in uterine tissues. Fluffy X, a 3D printed materials technology that really allows integration of vasculature and other soft tissues in an incredible way when implanted in the body, and many more. So this was still the curiosity side of me, trying like, I want to do as much as I possibly can with what I have in front of me. And this will become important after I launch my business. So multiple technologies, really multiple platforms. I wanted to still do everything I possibly could. And this resulted in some great work, right? Very proud of the work I did when I was at Northwestern University in terms of developing and demonstrating and using all of these systems, and the work I did with a lot of physicians while I was there. And this is critical because those physicians, as well as the work I did, resulted in many publications, many patents. And I'm sure folks on this call have themselves many publications and patents for the work they did. Before I get to the but, and there was a lot of attention given to these technologies outside the academic space, a lot of government attention. A lot of the work was displayed across the world at various art institutes, technology institutes, etc. And there was a lot of interest from large biotech and med tech companies who were coming in and were themselves very curious about 3D printing generally at the time, but were very interested in being able to rapidly 3D print complex structures from advanced functional biomaterials. So a lot of interest, a lot of talk was going on, right? And I had hoped, as I'm referencing back to an earlier slide, I had really hoped that because I had created the best thing ever, right? In my mind, the best thing ever, the best technology ever, that those big companies at the end of those conversations we were having would say, I want to license that. And then they would go ahead, make products, commercialize it, and get it to patients. And I could continue just creating lots of different things, fulfill my curiosity and fulfill my drive as an engineer to create new things, right? Or new technologies. But I ran into this at the end of those conversations with a lot of those companies, both large and small companies. It really came down to they were very interested in it. It was way too early. The commercial risk was too high, not only from just a technology standpoint where large scaling hadn't been demonstrated, large manufacturing hadn't been demonstrated, but what's the regulatory pathway for some of these? What's the market access plan? How are these going to get paid for once a product is actually produced? I didn't have answers at the time for any of that, right? And so at the end of those conversations and after getting lots of publications and lots of academic success, which at the time for me was like that was the pinnacle. I wanted academic success. I stopped and again asked myself, well, why do I do what I do? What's my motivation in all this? And again, I'm reflecting back on everything I've gone through in my life, all the way back to my early life at the hospitals and Ronald McDonald houses, and why I made the switch from my work at Georgia Tech to Northwestern University into biomaterials and regenerative medicine. And my simple answer is I want to help people. Like it's kind of as simple as the answer was. I want to help people. And if these larger companies, these larger organizations aren't going to take my technology and turn it into products and get it into patients, they're not going to do it, then I guess I have to do this. And that was my first experience where I had that strong feeling inside. It's like, I really have to do this. If I was being like very practical about it and you say, is this a smart financial decision to do? The answer probably no. To jump from academia into founding a company, the answer would be no, probably not a smart financial decision. If from a personal perspective, you put a lot of yourself into starting a company. So was it smart purely from a personal kind of well-being perspective? Probably not. But there was that drive, there was that motivation. Like I have to do this. I believe these technologies can really help people. And I believe it not just because of my own personal bias for the technology, but I had physicians from around the world asking if they could get these products. They weren't products at the time, but get the technology, get the materials, so because they had patients who were suffering that had no other alternatives, right? And this was across a variety of spaces, but there was a clear need that needed to be filled. And there were people who were suffering who could benefit from it. So I thought, well, I guess I have to do this. And so that was I would say the biggest professional decision I've ever had to make to date. Do I continue my life in academia and continue, conducting research and developing early stage technologies, or do I take this technology that I have to patients? And part of this decision part of the reason that I ultimately chose to choose the entrepreneurial side to found a company was that looking outside myself, I thought, there's a lot of smart people at universities and academia. A lot of great stuff is going to happen, right? Regardless of whether I'm there or not. But for what exists in front of me, what I've been focused on over the past 7 or 8 years, that's not going to get out there unless I do it. So I launched a company in 2017, Dimension Inc. Today it's called Dimension Bio. It's based in Chicago. I'm still based in Chicago myself. And so it was really focused on commercializing, and I use that term very loosely to start with, commercializing those technologies that I had developed during my time at Northwestern University. And I jumped into founding a company really without any business background. I might have taken like a seminar or two at Northwestern University. I jumped into it without really understanding how to build a business. Again, I think my naivety was both a strength and a weakness in this sense. I wish there were programs, and this was about 10 years ago, programs in front of me like Biolocity or others, and maybe they were there, I just never knew they were there. That could have really supported me in this big decision and educated me before I did this, but hey, learning on the fly is still a great way to learn. And as a early stage company, and I'm going to take you through kind of the development of Dimension Inc. a bit here. Because I didn't necessarily have a lot of business background, didn't really know exactly how to build up a business or even build up a team at the time. I did know that people wanted these materials and wanted these technologies. So the whole business model of the first 2 to 3 years of Dimension Inc., where I was at the time the sole employee, I'll get into that. That goes into the perseverance side. I manufactured and developed methodologies for scaling these materials productions so that I could sell them to government, sell these advanced materials to government, sell them to researchers in academia or industry. And Georgia Tech, fortunately, was actually a very good buyer at the time, keeping a good chunk of the business open. So as a business, I started selling research grade materials. And I think I was still kind of holding on to the hope that, if a lot of people start using these materials in research, again, they're going to develop their own applications and they're going to carry things to market that help patients, right? That was still going on in the back of my head because I was learning more and more of how much time and effort it really took to get a medical product, a regenerative product, from the lab to the patient. And I was honestly hoping that many others would do it and I could just support them. But that wasn't happening. What was happening was a lot of people were writing some very good papers using the materials that were bought, further demonstrating that those materials, those advanced biomaterials, were doing what they're supposed to be doing in a laboratory setting, whether that be in vitro, in vivo, in animals. And that was great. But I came back to that question, and this is early 2020 or late 2019. Why do I do what I do? And I was doing what I was doing because I wanted things to get to patients, and they weren't getting there, right? It was just a bigger version of academic research that I was enabling. And not only that, so the mission wasn't being met of my own personal mission or the company's mission of getting these technologies to patients. But from a financial perspective, selling research grade materials is not particularly lucrative. It's enough to keep operations going to a limited degree, but it's not enough to really grow a business, particularly when you're selling to a field that is relatively nascent, advanced 3D printing. I became heavily reliant on the actual 3D printer, the hardware manufacturers, right? So there wasn't a lot of financial upside to it, enough to survive, but not to grow. And there wasn't a lot of mission upside to it. Things weren't getting to the patients. And so this was another big choice. I had made the previous big leap of leaving academia to found a company, but now I had to really change the company. It's like, I'm not getting the patients. The financial upside isn't amazing. So what do we do? What do I do? Well, I decided to completely change the entire corporate strategy of Dimension Inc., which is a huge decision at the time, right? It's another big change where I decided to pull back entirely on selling materials to researchers, so no longer available, and instead focus entirely on getting the technology to a cleared or approved medical product that can get to a patient, right? And so this is where the company became going from selling research grade materials to actually developing a medical product, which is it's a big difference. That is a big pivot, right? That requires extensive financing, extensive team, understanding the market, really kind of incorporating that intellectual property strategy. And as I alluded to on a previous slide, really understanding that product to commercial pathway and all the aspects and expertise that are required to make that successful, right? And then as I went along, also understanding really the importance of culture and how that really shapes a company, from the beginning all the way to its larger growth stages, right? And so I began learning, I would say, more and more about the product development pathway and commercialization pathway, understanding that I could never be an expert at any of these things, or at all of these things. And even if I could, I don't have time to do everything. It's still at the time, this is early 2020, I'm a single person, right? Single person can't do everything, no matter how much they may want to, right? And then COVID hit. And I used to have a bunch of slides kind of talking about this kind of period here, but I'm just going to leave this slide up for a moment and really kind of highlight the perseverance side. So I imagine that the pandemic era was difficult for many of us, if not all of us, for a variety of different reasons. When you're starting a company and really deciding to pivot, basically restarting the company right at the beginning of a global pandemic, that makes it very difficult to fundraise, makes it difficult to build a team, makes it difficult to just generally operate. But I would say because of that strong motivation of wanting to get those things to patients, it may have slowed me down, it may have slowed Dimension Inc. down a bit, but ultimately we were successful. So despite COVID, in early 2020, right, we decided to keep going with that change that business model to full internal product development. I began building a team, so team members who could address all those distinct areas. And in order to build a team, right, you need to be able to you need to compensate them. And so compensation in terms of team building is a whole other discussion, but a big part of that is money, funding. And so that's when I also began to actively seek VC funding. And so in 2021, finally secured a seed round. Throughout 2020 to 2022, ultimately developed our first commercial product, CM Flex. Talk about that in just a little bit. But that seed round funded all that commercial or the regulatory and technical development of that first product. And that really led to securing a Series A in 2023. So really coming out to the other side of the pandemic period with a Series A. So, and with that, moving to a new facility and then focusing on scaled medical product manufacturing, scaled manufacturing of that CM Flex product, which I'll which I'll touch on in just in a moment. I do want to touch on the team aspect a fair bit. So the amount of work, the amount of effort it really took to take the product from, let's say, R&D level to what I was selling to universities, to government labs, etc., to really making it a consistent product was it can't be minimized. There was a lot of work that went into it and a lot of expertise across the board that went into it. So I was talking with Angie just a little bit before this. The team aspect of your company, especially those first founding members, those first hires, incredibly important to the success of your company, no matter what you're doing. So always remember, you don't have to go it alone. There are those around you who can help you, whether they be external advisors, internal advisors, or internal hires. Lots of groups want to help. Lots of individuals have different expertise. There's a lot of ways to get support and help in the areas that you don't have, in the areas of expertise that you don't have, or if you just don't have time to do a particular thing because you're doing something else, there are individuals you can rely on. So I'll touch on that at the end in a little bit, but really starting in 2022 through 2023, and this is where this is why I don't have much hair anymore. We implemented, after mentioning, extensive manufacturing and scaling and quality management systems. So another really critical subject for any kind of scaled technology development and commercialization. So during this time, manufactured thousands upon thousands of the CM Flex product. So a bone regeneration product indicated for maxillofacial applications, so upper and lower jaw applications. Built out what I still believe is the world's first large-scale mass 3D printing of regenerative product facilities in Chicago. Built out quality management systems. And in order to do that, had to create thousands upon thousands of these units to measure, to validate, to verify all of these exciting things so that the FDA would say, okay, you have clearance, you can market this product. And so that was intense, just even the manufacturing side of it. And I would say, for those of you on this webinar right now, if you're on the kind of the research mindset, in the same way that I was originally of the research mindset, when you get to the scaling and manufacturing and quality, there is definitely an entirely different mindset of individual type of person who is really, really good at that. So it can be hard if you have to go into producing the same thing over and over and over and over again, making the same measurements thousands of times over and over and over again, if you're of the research mindset. But look around you, talk to people, and I guarantee you'll find someone who loves doing that. So you don't have to be super, super scared when you get to that point. But this gets to, so there was a lot of perseverance going through all of that. Fundraising, I kind of glossed over it. Raising those funds was extremely difficult, particularly because of the COVID period. But extremely difficult, but we did it. And eventually we got FDA clearance for CM Flex. So I alluded to a while back in these slides, the hyperelastic bone 3D printed material. So this was the first FDA cleared 3D printed regenerative product on the market. And it still is, as far as I'm aware. So mass manufacturing of a 3D printed regenerative product on the market, it just hadn't been done before. So from the progress side, this was one of the biggest things. And then seeing it get into patients was one of the most rewarding things I've still ever had in my life. So that journey starting from really 2010, the idea of adapting what I did at Georgia Tech to 3D printing, to biomaterials, to having what I thought was the coolest idea in the world in 2016, 2017, to starting a company, and then over the next 6 to 7 years, developing that one of those materials into a single product, and then seeing it get into patients, it made it all worth it, right? For my motivations, I finally got something into a patient, and I was very excited. But a lot of that progress also led to a lot of other technologies and other product development going on at Dimension Inc. And you'll see it's now Dimension Bio here, where we were taking these advanced materials technologies that I had previously developed in academia. we're scaling them and we're coming up with really targeted product applications. So everything ranging from diabetes to liver to other soft tissues, so going well beyond bone. And then we get to really the end of 2023. So that CM Flex product, that first product, was in the market. Dimension Inc. was up and running, buzzing around, about 30 employees or so. And I stopped and I asked myself a question again: why do I do what I do? I got something to a patient, right? So I kind of reached a goal. But during that time, during my time building out Dimension, I also realized there were a lot of others coming out of academia who were in again, what I defined as the broader tissue therapeutic space, who were trying to do the same thing. And I guess from a pure technology standpoint and understanding markets at the time, I knew what they had was actually quite great. But I also knew the struggle that they had in front of them. And I wanted to be able to help. And so I had another path in front of me. And so as Dimension was going well, as I started to realize I wanted to help other companies, I went through the personal experience of my mom being diagnosed with pancreatic cancer and passing away. And so personal events such as that, unfortunately not uncommon, right? They do make you reflect on what you really want to do with your life. Now that you start realizing you have very limited time, you have, limited energy, there's only so much you can do as an individual, right? What is the biggest impact that you can make? And so that was the internal conversation I started having with myself, and it was being informed more and more by what I was seeing great researchers coming out of academia, having great potential products, but knowing that they had a huge path in front of them, and knowing that I could help them ultimately led me to really jump into the broader tissue therapeutic space to provide my expertise, my experience to those early stage entrepreneurs, early stage companies in the tissue therapeutic space. And so over the years, I had developed the background in tissue and organ repair, tissue and organ manufacturing, the broader tissue therapeutic side of things that involve including cell therapies, drug delivery, radiotherapies, etc. Right. So at Dimension, I was focused on individual products to get them across the finish line, which was very rewarding. But I realized that because of the expertise I had developed, not just in my academic life and on the technical side, but the expertise I had developed over the course of building out Dimension Inc., with its many successes and the many mistakes I also made, I could help many others who had products in all of these spaces, right? And so that's when I decided to leave my role full-time at Dimension and start a consulting company. The consulting company, Biothera3, allowing me to work with many different teams, simultaneously, providing my experiences and expertise to them. And my slogan for, maybe it's not great, but I always say, how can I help? And if I can't help, how can I, who could I introduce you to? What are you looking for? So I love to connect people in that way. And so what I've been doing at Biothera3 is not only helping those early stage entrepreneurs with getting their businesses off the ground and figuring things out, both from a strategic, financing, and technological perspective, but I also actively work towards providing education towards government entities as well as investors who they've heard of this space, and maybe they've been doing cell and gene therapy, but they're kind of tiptoeing into biomaterials or tissue regenerative products. I like educating them. I like informing them. I like teaching them about this space, not only how it's similar to what's been, I would say, relatively established in cell and gene therapies and medical devices, but also how it's different and what to expect in terms of returns as well as time to market and all of those things. So I get the opportunity through my Biothera3 company to work with a lot of different individuals, work with a lot of different teams, work with a lot of different organizations, both large and small. But quite honestly, I just like working for the smaller ones better. As I mentioned, I like mentoring and advising, and I get to do most of that when I'm working with smaller teams. And so my journey's not done. What I haven't even talked about here is that during this time, as I've been operating Biothera3, I've joined another company as a CEO, Pro Therapeutics, that's manufacturing tendons and ligaments, right? I've met another, I did that because I met another very passionate individual, a founder, who had a really great technology. It filled a real need, but they needed help, right? And so my passion, my motivation became how can I help others in this space get their ideas to market, get their ideas to the patients who need them, right? And so now I've entered another cycle of perseverance with a new startup, but I would say it's always well, I'm not gonna say it's always easier because I've only done it once now, and I'm only my own person, but having done it once, knowing that there's bright lights at the end of the tunnel, the progress side, as long as you can keep persevering and pushing through all the challenges with starting a company and building a company, the 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 outcomes, the rewards can be huge, right? And I'm not just talking about financial, I'm just talking about it's making a difference, making an impact, whatever your motivations are, they can be huge. And so knowing that they're there just makes that perseverance side a little bit easier. And so for all of you who are listening right now, who you know have their own startup company, are thinking about starting it, have potential product idea, as you're developing it, as you're going through this process of entrepreneurship, it can be difficult to see the light at the end of the tunnel. But it is there. Even if for some reason the product ultimately doesn't make it to market, what you learn in that process, the experiences you have, will make the next time you do it, should you decide to do it, that much easier, right? So that in itself is progress. Oops. So I'm not going to talk about product development. I'm not going to talk about corporate strategy. Those are topics for another day, and there's many individuals who can speak to it. But I want to ensure that through my experience or communicating my experience that you all have some idea of the journey in front of you, should you decide to take it. So an understanding that it is going to be very difficult, but also an understanding that if you persevere, and as long as you keep interacting with others, building your network, building your teams, you don't have to do it alone. And at some point, you will make some progress. And ideally, if something is getting to a patient or improving healthcare in some way, but at the very least, you're learning, you're developing those experiences so that you can do it again and then do it better the next time. So I always kind of leave with that question. Just stop and ask yourself this every now and then. Why do you do what you do? You have limited time in this world. You have limited energy to expend. Why are you doing what you're currently doing? And if you're really passionate about what you're doing, go for it. So with that, just kind of tie it up here. Thank you for having me. I wanted to leave a little time in case there was, a chance for questions, but I hope that was helpful. It was very high level. I tried to make it a little, personal because an entrepreneurial journey is personal, right? It's not just about the company, it's about you as an individual. So thank you.
Absolutely, Adam. That was amazing. So, kick off a couple of questions. I want to start off with the piece where you went and you started building your team. So, I know a lot of the attendees, and we have attendees online. We have a couple of places across the ecosystem that live stream this to like Beacon Collabs, welcome Beacon Collabs, and several of the others. And I know that as a young entrepreneur, some of those early hires, especially when either you have no funding or very limited funding, are super critical. So, can you walk through some of your thought process along those lines and maybe just even highlight some common mistakes that you see when founders are looking to hire their very first like external person, such as maybe the CEO or something like that?
Sure. That's probably the most critical thing is those initial team members. So maybe I'll start with some mistakes. When I started hiring or engaging folks to come onto Dimension, I think I went about it originally the wrong way, where I was looking for it's like I need this skill, I need this skill, and I need this skill. And I actually may have communicated it that way when I was going to those slides here. And that may not have been the best way to think about it. What I should have done, or at least done more of, was less about I need this skill, I need this skill, I need this skill. It's more about I need those hires to share the same passion or share a very similar passion for what we're doing. And I needed that to be the case because one, didn't necessarily have a lot to offer them in terms of funding or equity in the company. Offering equity is a way to provide some compensation when you don't have a lot of funding to give. The funding we did have was from the sales of the research grade products I was talking about. Probably would have done SBIRs more had I thought about it more early on. But sharing the passion to start because they're going along that hard time with you. They're going to need to have that same motivation kind of going through everything. So identifying their passion is important. Communicating your own passion to them is important. And in terms of hiring leadership team members, what I did, and I think this was the right thing to do, so I would still advise to do it, was early on in the company, I was actively going out to any opportunity I could, talking about what the company does, why it does it, and why I'm excited about it. So I was sharing or communicating my passion out there to many people, right? As many people as I could. And every now and then, a couple of people would come up after talks or in conversations and say, I am very interested in what you're doing. How can I get involved? Right. Some of those conversations led towards leadership team hires, right? Where those leadership team members were far enough along in their careers where they didn't need immediate payment, right? They understood that payment would come with funding. So they were able to work for reduced salaries or zero salaries while we actively fundraise. So I would say I was only able to do that because I was able to communicate my passion for a particular subject, the company's focus, and they shared something similar. So they were willing to also kind of make a sacrifice to join the team. But I would say passion is the most important thing. If team members don't believe in what you're doing, it's going to be hard for them to kind of carry on or push through or mesh with the team when the difficult time comes. And difficult times will always come in a startup. So there's the passion side, and then there's the curiosity side. Do they want to learn different skills? Because I guarantee you, when you're first hiring employees to work at your company, you think they're going to be doing one thing, but they're going to be doing another thing probably the next month. And can they learn that? Do they like to learn that? So that's also important. So don't make it purely skill-based hiring for those first hires.
Amazing. Okay, I have one more question on this realm, and then we have a topic in a different area. So while we're still talking about team and building that, one of the things that I'm very passionate for our ecosystem to understand is how founders and entrepreneurs need to be incredibly coachable,
Mm.
and how if they're not coachable, then they will immediately be shut out of conversations with VCs and things like that. Can you kind of talk a little bit? And of course, I laid it up. So if you say they don't have to be coachable, Adam, we can't be friends anymore.
Yeah,
But
you're
yeah,
right.
can you kind of talk about that?
Yeah, well, you laid it up really well. So being coachable, I would say what it means to me. Well, you're right, first of all, that if you're not coachable, and I'll define what I think coachable means in a second, but if you're not coachable, that shuts out everybody, right? In terms, not just VCs, people you're approaching for funding, it shuts out your team. It shuts out everybody you're working with. So coachable to me means one, you're self-conscious enough, self-conscious enough to realize that you don't have all the answers, that everybody you speak with or every time you present is an opportunity to get more information and feedback, which you are at least flexible enough to potentially use that information to change what you're doing, right? And kind of what's kind of guiding all that is just the understanding that you should be self-aware enough to know you don't have all the answers. Your technology is, or whatever you have, is not, it's probably not the best thing in the world. Like, the best thing since sliced bread. It could be extremely useful and it can solve a problem, right? And being open to critiques or suggestions and recommendations, because first-time founders, first-time entrepreneurs, again, have not gone through all this. There are many people who have gone through this. There are many people who have worked at many companies who have gone through this many times. So they've seen the pitfalls, they've seen the successes, and just being open to any kind of critique, any kind of information, any kind of advice. Doesn't necessarily mean it's all good information or good advice, but being open to it and really kind of thinking about it seriously is incredibly important. And to me, that's what coachable means. It doesn't necessarily mean you'll enact every piece of advice you get, but you will seriously consider it. And then you'll be able to have that conversation with that individual, whoever's doing that active coaching, to not make them also feel like they're wasting their time trying to impart their knowledge and their experience on you. So be coachable. Don't turn down other people's or critiques, right? Other people have experiences and knowledge that you could definitely use no matter what you're doing.
I love that. And I think it's important to remember that the individuals, whether you're speaking at a conference or you're talking to VCs or you are looking to hire new people, they're looking at your team dynamics too. So
Yes.
how you interact with each other on pitch day when you're talking to a VC or something like that, they're looking at that because we know the team is what will really drive that success.
And I'll add one thing to that because I forgot to mention it, but what you just said just reminded me is that as you're building that team, you're hiring people who are reporting to you. And you might be a first-time leader or executive at a company. It's your own company, but it's still your first time. So being open to coaching or critiques from those working under you is incredibly important, right? Like, so it's not just those people on the outside who can give you money or give you stuff that you need. It's your own team members. So be coachable from everybody. I would say that's probably true in the personal life too. Be coachable from everybody you interact with.
Love it. Okay, and now shifting just a little bit, we have a question in the Q&A. And so they said, fantastic talk, Adam. As a fellow Georgia Tech undergrad who focused on biomaterials and 3D printing for their PhD, this individual is fortunate to develop some promising drug delivery technology through their research, which they recently filed IP on. He says, I think there still needs to be some refinement in the technology to elucidate a commercial pathway, and they have some ideas. However, for a variety of reasons, they've been unable to continue the work in the PhD lab and don't have direct support. So the question to you, Adam, given this scenario, and I think this is a very common scenario
Yeah.
that we hear a lot during this transition from academic to what you're going to do next, right? So the question is, do you have any advice for finding opportunities outside of your original traditional academic incubators to continue building technology towards commercial readiness in this space?
That's a good question. I mean, I'll we probably don't have enough time to go too in depth, but I'll approach it from two different ways. So one way, which I consider a really common thing, is that so you've developed the early stages of a technology, you got some IP going. That IP is likely owned by the university, so Georgia Tech in this case. Um, but maybe you're graduating, or again, for whatever reason, that technology is still at, let's say, Georgia Tech or whatever university. You don't necessarily have access to it. Um, and I think this is somewhat what happened with me was um, when I was launching my company, I had to convince at the time Northwestern that I had a real business plan to be able to be financially stable if I were to license the technology out of the university, right? And luckily the department and the PIs supported all that. I was able to convince the tech transfer office, who kind of managed the IP at the university, that I was reliable and at least I had a chance for it. So I mean that's what I did, and that's what I would advise. If you can do that, do that. But before you do that, and there's a little caveat here, just given the way the government in the world is right now, if you're able to validate it by getting say some SBIR funding or other kind of government funding that helps you push out the door of the university a little bit, or you can negotiate with the university to have a couple months at the university to get up and running. So there's that. Once you're fully separated from the university, though, um, if you're not, you need an entity to further develop your technology or product under, right? So if you're not at the university, what that means is you probably need to have your own company, start a company, and then you have to negotiate with the university. So I wish there was a place, and this is maybe a personal goal of mine, where it can just be like a large engineering science space where individuals who are coming out of university can just continue working on their ideas a bit more, and then they can go out into the world and found a company or do more with it, right? That's just not necessarily how it is. So you do need to still be working under some type of entity, whether it's that university in some capacity or whether it's your own company that you founded and have licensed the technology from. But I would say if my email's right here, feel free to email me, and I'm happy to talk more about that and kind of get into more specifics, particularly since you're on the 3D printing side. Love talking about that.
Amazing. So Adam, when you fulfill your goal of creating that ecosystem, we definitely it needs to be in Atlanta, not in Chicago. Uh,
I fully agree with that. I think Atlanta's booming. Yeah,
yes,
I would
yes,
do it
yes.
there.
Well, Adam, we know, especially watching this and observing this, thank you first off as well for sharing those personal stories. They impacted me every single time, and I'm sure the listeners were really impacted by that. And that personal side is really what has led to that perseverance for you. So I love and I'm grateful for you sharing that. Also, we can tell you're really busy, and we know you had to say no to something else to collaborate with us today. So thank you for saying yes to us today and being a part of this series. We are very grateful.
Of course, yeah. Thank you for the invitation. And yes, if there's any more questions or any of you all would like to talk more, feel free to reach out to me.
Amazing. And before everyone leaves, I am going to share my screen one more time and show the QR codes so that if you want to connect with Biolocity, you want to be on our newsletter to make sure that you are notified of events that we have. Please go ahead and connect with us. If you're in our ecosystem and you have an event and you would like for us to highlight it, please send it to us as well. And of course, if you have some successes, we would love to share your successes with everyone. If you have additional questions from, we will go forward and not backwards, from Biolocity, you can also send us an email and reach out to us. Thank you for spending some time with us today, and we wish you great success.